Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow?
What happened? What happened?
God.
What's your name? What's your name?
What's your name?
What's your name?
What's your name?
Can you say
One protester, fractured skull, critical condition after the second night of police violence at Occupy Oakland. The injured man is Scott Olson, a 24-year-old Iraq veteran. As help reached him, police fired gas canisters at them. Police out of control in Oakland, and a mayor, herself once a victim of the Oakland PD, is now their chief enabler.
The issue is not whether we support the movement. The issue is the safety of the people who are staying overnight.
Tonight, my special comment, why Mayor Jean Quan must either repent and repair or resign. Occupy Atlanta cleaned out. 52 arrests under the pretense of failure to obey lawful commands. Occupy Baltimore threatened tonight.
That doesn't scare us. I mean, if we're going to get based, beat up, locked up, so be it.
I have not.
Somebody has to stick up for the big, the big picture here.
Occupy Wall Street and healthcare. The march to St. Vincent's Hospital today. Occupy Wall Street and the life mortgages that are student loans. Even the president sits up and takes notice. A bill to cap federal student loan repayments and forgive the debt 5 years earlier. Occupy Day 40 with Keith Shannon, the roommate of the Iraq vet, critically injured in Oakland, with Baltimore organizer Cullen Nowakowski, with Dr. Stephen Auerbach of Physicians for a National Healthcare Program, and with economist Robert Reich. Another day, another smear from the political whorehouse that is Fox News.
It turns out some of this movement may be more organized than many think, with ties to the now defunct community activist group, Acorn.
And still, the 1% claims victimhood. The CEO of Bank of America. I, like you, get a little incensed when you think about how much good all of you do, whether it's volunteer hours, charitable giving we do, serving clients and customers well. You ought to think a little about that before you start yelling at us. F*** you. All that and more now on Countdown.
Bank of America.
Good evening from New York. This is Wednesday, October 26th. It's 377 days until the 2012 presidential election. At this hour, a Marine veteran of the Iraq War lies in Oakland's Highland Hospital in critical condition. Scott Olson, age 24, member of Iraq Veterans Against the War, suffered a fractured skull when he was apparently struck in the head last night with a tear gas canister, fired, if not by Oakland police, then by someone from one of the other 18 law enforcement agencies charged with suppressing an Occupy Oakland protest. A vigil is underway for Mr. Olson now in Oakland as friends await word of his condition. The fifth story on the countdown, the Occupy movement in this country has been reliably peaceful through its brief existence. Protesters in many cities have reached out to police proactively, and in many cases they've quoted street cops as saying they support the movement's goals. And while police violence has been dealt out to Occupy protesters in Boston and New York, there has been nothing even remotely on the scale of what has happened in Oakland in the last 48 hours, especially last night, as Occupy marchers tried to return to their camp at Frank Ogawa Plaza, having been cleared out by police, with 105 arrests some 12 hours before. The violence first broke out around 5 p.m. Pacific time yesterday as police clashed with protesters marching towards the plaza. The San Francisco Gate reporting some protesters tried to fight or throw paint at police while other protesters tried to make them stop. A few hours later, large crowds near the plaza entrance were warned they would be targeted with, quote, chemical agents if they refused to disperse. 5 tear gas barrages followed, setting off clashes that went on for hours. Oakland's interim police chief Howard Jordan said, quote, the gas was necessary to protect our officers. According to the San Jose Mercury News, police say they also used beanbag rounds, so-called flashbang grenades, and rubber bullets. You can see that in this video. Scott Olson is the man on the ground. A flashbang grenade thrown from behind the police line lands near him, and after a brief panic, Mr. Olson is carried to safety.
What happened? What happened?
Got hit.
Got shot. What's your name? What's your name?
What's your name?
What's your name?
What's your name?
Can you say
In a few moments, I'll talk with Keith Shannon, Scott Olsen's roommate who served 3 years with him in Iraq, and I'll have a special comment on the culpability of Mayor Gene Kwan of Oakland, who just last year had been a victim of the out-of-control Oakland PD. But the Occupy suppression was not limited to the Bay Area. In Atlanta, at least 52 arrests. Protesters were charged with violating an ordinance against being in Woodruff Park after 11 p.m. State Senator Vincent Ford was among the arrestees. Some of those arrested insisted they will return to Woodruff Park, Atlanta. In Albuquerque, more than a dozen arrests after protesters refused to leave the campsite on the University of New Mexico campus. The movement calls itself Unoccupy Albuquerque, given the connotations of the word occupy for the city's many Native Americans. Those protesters say they will be back too. And in Baltimore, no arrests as yet, but a deadline has expired for protesters to respond to the city's demands for an agreement that would, among other things, restrict nighttime access to downtown McKeldin Square. City spokesman Ryan O'Doherty noting in a statement that while camping in the square is prohibited, city government is committed to protecting the free speech rights of Baltimore's citizens, and that is why any citizen is free to peacefully demonstrate at McKeldin Plaza in accordance with establishment guidelines. Occupy protesters have made it clear their rights to free speech and free assembly should not be subject to, quote, established guidelines. Joe Burt is with Occupy Baltimore.
We don't have any plans of going anywhere. That doesn't scare us. I mean, if we're going to get maced, beat up, locked up, so be it. I mean, somebody has to stick up for the big, the big picture here.
And city officials in Boston seem to be getting that big picture. After one spasm of police violence on the 11th of this month, city health officials toured Occupy's camp today and pronounced it relatively clean. The U.S. public seems to get the big picture as well. According to the latest CBS News New York Times poll, 43% of adults say they agree with the views of the Occupy movement. Only 27% say they do not. The other 30% aren't sure. When asked if money and wealth are distributed fairly in America, just 26% say yes and 66% say no, just like Occupy Wall Street. Now, as promised, Keith Shannon, Scott Olsen's roommate, a member of Iraq Veterans Against the War, joining us now from San Francisco. Thank you for your time tonight on this of all nights, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
What's the latest on his condition? A stable, family present? Do you have a prognosis?
Right now, he's stable but critical. His family is on their way from Wisconsin. They should be in about 11:30 Pacific tomorrow. Right now, he's sedated on a respirator with the skull fracture and swelling in his brain, and the neurosurgeons are still trying to decide whether or not they need to take him into surgery.
I don't mean to put too fine a point on this, but is it clear whether or not his injuries are life-threatening?
I don't believe they're life-threatening, but we don't know if it's going to cause permanent brain damage or not.
Yeah, well, there's something to hold on to, at least in one small space there of good news. When and how did you hear about this injury last night?
I heard about it this morning. I woke up and I had a lot of messages from some of Scott's family, as well as from people at the protest who Scott had told them his roommate's first name, and they were able to find me. And so once I got up, I started looking around, trying to find out where he was, and headed to the hospital once I located him.
So by the time you got there, he was already sedated, I assume?
Yes.
So,
yes.
But we should make that clear, because from the video, it's apparent that he's conscious after he got hit. So there was some lucidity there, and they chose to put him unconscious to
correct
to hasten his recovery.
Correct. He walked into the hospital, and then they sedated him there.
All right. Well, that's good to begin with. Let's talk about the bigger picture. Were you surprised, even after what happened on Monday night, were you surprised that this escalated to what it did last night?
Definitely. I was quite surprised.
What happened? I mean, is there the Oakland PD obviously has a reputation for claiming provocation for anything and everything it does. Is there any evidence that the kind of riot gear, canister shooting or throwing police, gigantic presence that was there was somehow called for? Were these problems instigated by the protesters in any serious way, to your knowledge?
I've been talking to a lot of the protesters who were there when it happened, and they were just on a peaceful march, and the police officers started pulling them out of the march and arresting some of them, which is when it started getting slightly out of hand, is when the protesters started throwing paint and water. Mm-hmm. And when the protesters tried to march back to their encampment, the police officers opened up with them with rubber bullets, the flashbang, and the smoke canisters. My
understanding is there were ear witness reports, I guess would be the description of these people, that those flashbang grenades sounds almost like something you might use on a rather raunchy 4th of July. My understanding is the impact of those things could be felt 2 miles away. These are not toys we're talking about.
Right, they're definitely very serious.
Tell me about your service with Scott in Iraq. Did your experiences there impact how you see and chose to get involved in this movement?
It definitely did. We both disagreed with the Iraq War even while we were on tour there. And Scott especially has been extremely active with veterans for peace, as well as Iraq veterans against the war. So,
what would obviously you haven't spoken to him, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but you have an assessment of how he would feel about being suddenly a central figure who is internationally known in this effort?
Well, we talk about it a lot, and I think he would appreciate the fact that this experience, no matter how bad it is being used for something good to put light on what's really going on there.
Last question. Are you going to continue, get involved further in Occupy protests going forward?
Yes, I'm definitely going to invest myself even more than I was before.
Keith Shannon, the roommate of Scott Olson, the Occupy protester who lies in critical condition in a hospital in Oakland tonight, and both members of Iraq Veterans Against War. Our thanks, our best wishes to all of you affected by what happened to him.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.